what's apparent to me is people can get so hostile, you know, about if you say something that disagrees with them, they don't want to hear about it. It doesn't make any difference if what you're saying is true. If you disagree, they get very hostile. I have people that call up on the answering machine and say, I'm a born-again Christian, and they'll curse you out. I mean, they'll really use tough, bad language in disagreeing with you, or, you know, saying all kinds of things. It doesn't hurt. Jesus Christ said, ask, seek. Now, it doesn't hurt to disagree about the interpretation of the Bible. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody's always done that. And when you look, then, for hidden meanings, you're simply following what the Bible says you should do. But in particular, this one fellow called, he was outraged because he said that I was teaching about astrology in the Bible, and that God has nothing to do with astrology, and astrology is evil. What you have to try to understand is, in speaking of the evil of astrology, the Bible is relating it to fortune-telling. Fortune-telling indeed is. But that's not astrological science. That's not the scientific astrology that was so prevalent in biblical times. Because it wasn't talking about fortune-telling, it was talking about the influences that various constellation formations have on the human mind. That's just a scientific fact. I mean, you can't say that the moon doesn't control the tides. It does. I mean, you're 98% seawater, so obviously you would be affected by it. You can't say the sun doesn't control life. It does. And the other constellations do have an effect on the way people think. But when you say God will have nothing to do with astrology, before we just blatantly say that, say this is the way it is, God will have nothing to do with astrology, let's consider that on the very first page of the Bible, in Genesis 1:13, it talks about the creation of the stars, and it says, let them be for signs. Okay. That's astrology. If the Bible says the stars are for signs, then it's very important that we find out what the signs mean, wouldn't you think? Or do we just disregard that? And we're not talking about fortune-telling now. We're talking about signs. If the Bible says that the stars are for signs, then we should find out what the signs mean. That's astrology. The Bible says that God made the stars and He gave them all names. Aquarius, Gemini, Cancer, Sagittarius. Well, if He gave them all names, don't you think that He would give them names that had a meaning? And shouldn't you find out what those names mean? So there we've taken a look at two aspects of astrology and as a science shown in the Bible. The stars were made to be signs, and God gave them names. So then you should, I would think, investigate the stars to find out what the signs mean and why they were called what they're called. That's astrology. Not fortune-telling. Astrological science. Okay, there's two. Genesis and Proverbs. Genesis and, what did I say? Proverbs 1:47. Let the stars be for signs, and God gave them all names. Now, let me ask you another question. Let me ask you a question. Do these constellations influence the way people think? That's definitely astrology, isn't it? To say that constellations influence the way people think. If I can show you in the Bible where the Bible confirms that, then we have three aspects here. We have Genesis saying, let them be for signs. We have Psalm 147 saying that God names all the stars. So we got that they're signs, that they have names. And then let's go to Job 38. Job chapter 38, verse 32, in which it says, can you bind, and this is interesting, the sweet influence of Pleiades?
No.
The Pleiades is a star cluster in the constellation Taurus. But the Bible specifically says here that the Pleiades exercises a sweet influence. And it says, can you bind that influence? So now there's the Bible telling us in the book of Job that the Pleiades has an influence and it can't be bound by you unless you know how. There's the Bible saying God named all the stars. You should find out why. And there's the Bible saying that the stars are for signs, and it would seem that you would want to find out what the signs mean. There's another thing in Job 38:2. In addition to the sweet influence of Pleiades, Job 38:32 says, can you loose the bands, we'll put that down, loose the bands of Orion. Orion is a magnificent constellation. So there's two statements in the Bible, in the book of Job, naming the constellations with the same name that we call them today. And this is written 5,400 years ago. And asking you, can you bind the sweet influence of Pleiades? Can you loose the bands of Orion? That's astrology. There's one other thing. Interesting. And for those of you who really take exception to this and disagree, and let's just disagree. I mean, you know, I get mad about it. I'm just telling you what it says. But let's look at this one. Job 38:32. It says, can you bring forth Mazzaroth? M-A-Z-Z-A-R-O-T-H. Can you bring forth Mazzaroth? If you go into your Christian dictionary and look up the word Mazzaroth, or look it up any place else where you can find a definition of it, you'll find that it is the 12 signs of the Zodiac. It's in the Bible. So what I've shown you then, and somebody's saying, well, God will have nothing to do with astrology, is the Bible says that he said that the stars should be for signs. That's astrology. He named the stars. That's astrology. He said that Pleiades has a sweet influence, that Orion's bands cannot be loosed, and that Mazzaroth cannot be brought forth. So he's talking about the influence of constellations, the influence of the Zodiac. So without getting hyper about it and without freaking out and saying, hey, you know, you're evil and all of these words because you're saying these things, I'm reading you the Bible. And I gave you the scriptures.